So Luke chapter 7, we're going to be looking at verses 1 through 10. All right, so here's how we're going to do it tonight. We're going to read through the entire passage, and then we're going to go back and reread it and kind of diagnose it a little bit. Tonight, there's no points, all right? But instead, there's questions. This is one of those passages that feels like it's going to teach us more if we just ask ourselves real questions, right? So I'm not going to tell you what you're supposed to learn. Instead, I'm going to ask you questions so that God can speak to you and you can walk away with whatever it is that God puts on you. So Luke chapter 7, beginning in verse 1. When Jesus had concluded saying all this to the people who were listening, he entered Capernaum, and a centurion servant who was highly valued by him was sick and about to die. When the centurion heard about Jesus, he sent some Jewish elders to him, requesting him to come and save the life of his servant. When they reached Jesus, they pleaded with him earnestly, saying, "He is worthy for you to grant this because he loves our nation and has built us a synagogue." Jesus went with them, and when he was not far from the house, the centurion sent friends to tell him, "Lord, don't trouble yourself, since I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. That is why I didn't even consider myself worthy to come to you. But say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I too am a man placed under authority, having soldiers under my command. I say to this one, 'Go,' and he goes, and to another, 'Come,' and he comes, and to my servant, 'Do this,' and he does it." Jesus heard this and was amazed at him, and turning to the crowd following him, he said, "I tell you, I have not found so great a faith even in Israel." When those who had been sent returned to the house, they found the servant in good health. This is a story that at first glance doesn't feel like there's a lot going on. But there's a lot going on in this story. So, now that we've read it, let's reread it. All right? Verse 1. When Jesus had concluded saying all of this to the people who were listening. Stop. Okay, this is our moment for recap. When he had concluded saying all this to the people. What is all this that he's referring to? Anybody know? The Sermon on the Mount. Yes. See, we're doing a walk through the Gospels. We're walking through it chronologically. And so we have to assume that what Luke is referring to is that Jesus, what we just spent like 12 weeks, 15 weeks, I don't even know how long we were in the Sermon on the Mount. However long it was, that's what he's talking about. And to all of the people who were listening. So the Sermon on the Mount, there was a lot going on there. There's the upside down kingdom. There's the blessed R's. There's the things that we're not supposed to do. The things that we're supposed to do. There's understanding of why Jesus was there, right? Not to abolish the law, but to fulfill the law. The greatest commandment, to love God, to love others. The golden rule comes out of, there's a lot going on. So after Jesus had just finished saying all of this, he went into Capernaum. Verse 2, a centurion's servant who was highly valued by him was sick and about to die. When the centurion heard about Jesus, he sent some Jewish elders to him, requesting him to come and save the life of the servant. When they reached Jesus, they pleaded with him earnestly, saying, "He is worthy for you to grant this, because he loves our nation and has built us a synagogue." Pause. Here's my first question for us tonight. Are you known for who you are or what you do? Are you known for who you are or what you do? Now, at first glance, this question almost feels like it goes against what we talked about in the Sermon on the Mount. Because in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus talked about, don't go and pray in the middle of public. Go into a quiet corner, for God already knows the secrets of your heart. When you give, don't make a public display of it. Give quietly. Right? But now I'm asking you this question of, are you known for who you are or what you do? So are people supposed to know what you do? Well, I think in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus kind of alluded to, how should you be known? You should be known by how great your love is for other people. The greatest command is to love God and love others. Jesus talked about in the Sermon on the Mount that some of the things that we should do, that if somebody asks for our shirt, we should offer them our coat as well. If somebody asks you to walk a mile with them, offer to walk too. Pastor Gavin actually taught on that one, and we learned that line was directly referring to a Jewish person having an interaction with a Roman centurion. That if a Roman centurion was walking through and he needed help, by law, he could ask you to help carry the load for up to a mile. And Jesus said, well, why stop at one? Offer to go two. And so here's the thing about this Roman centurion. This Roman centurion should have been hated by the Jews. This Roman centurion was a walking symbol of their everyday oppression. The armor that he wore, those stupid little feathers sticking out of his helmet, everything about him represented that face on those coins that Caesar constantly was taking back from you. This centurion was a walking, living, breathing image of Caesar, who was nothing but the Lord of their oppression. The centurion should have been hated by the Israelites. But the centurion was not known for who he worked for. Instead, he was known by who he served. And it wasn't the authority of leadership that this man was known for serving. This man was known by the way that he went out of his way to serve the community that he lived in. Now, nowhere in here does it tell us that he was a Christian. Nowhere in here does it tell us that he believed in God. But we can infer that he probably was leaning towards that. It might even be possible that this Roman centurion wasn't Roman. Maybe he was somebody whose ancestors lined up with the nation of Israel. And at some point along the way, he had been recruited into Caesar's army. And once he got into the army, he proved that he was more than just a warrior, but he was a leader, and that he had worked his way up to this position. See, a Roman centurion, how do you guys think, I'm going to go to the smart side. How do you guys think they got the name centurion?
Century?
Centurion. What does century stand for?
Years?
How many years?
100.
100 years. Okay? So century stands for 100. So a centurion was put in charge of how many soldiers?
100 soldiers.
100 soldiers. So this man had authority over 100 soldiers. And if these soldiers had to do what he said, you know the people who were around automatically listened to what he did. And I love that that in the story, he says that he sends these Jewish leaders. Okay, he's friends with the Jews. They shouldn't be friends, but they're friends. And these Jewish leaders go to Jesus and they say, there's a centurion whose servant is dying. Would you come back? This man is loved. In fact, he built us a synagogue where we can worship God. Here's actually what's really cool. Check out the screen on this one. Today, if you go into Capernaum, you can see the remnants of the synagogue, supposedly, right? But all facts point to the synagogue that this centurion built. What you can see here is there's this light-colored stone on top. Now, this light color is a synagogue that was built on top of the remains of a synagogue that had been there years before. This dark layer right here is the foundation of a synagogue that's been dated all the way back to the 1st century. And it's right inside the city gates of Capernaum. And so today this is actually a synagogue that you can go. It's been refurbished. It's been fixed up, and just looking at the pictures, it's an amazing example of what a religious worship center would have looked like in the Jewish community. But I love that that's what this guy was known for. Right? He says first there's a centurion. But I love that when the Jewish leaders tell Jesus, they didn't go and say, we're here because the centurion commanded us to come and find you. They said, he is worthy for you to grant this because he loves our nation and has built us a synagogue. This is a man who's probably accrued a decent amount of wealth and property being a centurion. And it appears, though, that he's used his wealth, he's used his leadership to pour into and to serve his community. So my question, are you known for your title? Are you known for your place of work? Are you known by whatever it is that you might be known by? Or are you known by what you do? Are you known by how you serve your community, how you love your neighbors? We'll pick this story back up. Verse 6, Jesus went with him, and when he was not far from the house, okay, we're going to stop. Here, I know, this one we didn't get very far. Jesus went with them when he was not very far from the house. We're going to pause. So here's what we see. Jesus started walking to the centurion's house. So here's my question for you. Are you a hearer, a listener, or a doer? The Bible tells us that we should be more than just hearers of the word, that we should also be doers of the word. And let's be honest, this is a struggle that we all have in life. Would you guys agree with me? This is a struggle, and not just in our Christian faith. This is a struggle, period. To be a listener, to be a hearer, to be a listener, to be a doer. There's a process. All right, you ready? Let's look at the process. You can hear somebody and recognize that they're speaking to you, but choose not to listen to a word they have to say. So that's a hearer. A listener recognizes that they're being spoken to and chooses to listen to what's being said. A doer listens to what they've heard and then chooses to act on it. This is something that happens a lot as parents, as spouses, as kids, right? Husbands are known to suffer from selective listening disease. It's a disease, guys. We can't help it. It's in our DNA. It's a disease. It's selective listening. We can't help it. This happens to me all the time with my kids. They'll look at me and they'll go, "So, what's the answer?" And I'll turn and I'll look at them and go, "Oh my gosh, I totally answered you in my head, but I never actually responded out loud." Right? Or Michelle will ask me for a favor. This happens quite frequently. She'll call me. I'll answer the phone. I will hear her words. She will say, "Can you bring this to me?" And I will say, "Yes, I will do that." Then when I get there, she will say, "Did you bring this for me?" And I'll say, "No, I did not." I can be a pretty decent hearer. I can be a pretty decent listener. And sometimes I just utterly fail at doing. Do you guys have this problem too? Am I the only incompetent person in here? But does anybody else suffer from not following through with things? Right? Like, how many of you have great intentions and poor follow through? But the reason why we stopped right here in our passage is to simply look at this. Jesus is following through. Jesus not only said all those things on the Sermon on the Mount, now he's going to put it into practice. One of the things that he said on the Sermon on the Mount is that we're supposed to love our enemies. And this centurion should have been an enemy. And what's Jesus do when he hears from them? When the Jewish leaders come up to him and he goes, "Oh, a centurion? I hate that dude!" No! Tell him life sucks. Get over it. No, we don't get Jesus' response. It just says, and he started going. All right, we'll pick up the story. The second half of verse 6. The centurion, Jesus went with them, and when he was not far from the house, the centurion sent friends to tell him, "Lord, don't trouble yourself, since I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. That is why I didn't even consider myself worthy to come to you. But say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I too am a man placed under authority, having soldiers under my command. I say to this one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my servant, do this, and he does it." Jesus heard this and was amazed at him, and turning to the crowd following him, he said, "I tell you, I have not found so great a faith even in Israel." My next question is this: is Jesus amazed at your faith? This is one of only 2 times that the Bible ever records that Jesus is amazed. The only other time that Jesus is amazed comes from Mark chapter 6. This is the story of Jesus showing up in his hometown, and everybody starts questioning him, of going, "We've heard about these things that he's done, and we've heard about the things that he said, but isn't he the carpenter's son? Isn't that James and Jude's brother? Isn't he the son of Mary? Surely he can't be special." And then Jesus talks about, even in your home, I'm going to turn to it because I'm going to mess up the quote if I try doing it off the top of my head. So Mark chapter 6. Verse 4, Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor except in his hometown, among his relatives and his household." He was not able to do a miracle there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and healed them. And he was amazed at their unbelief. 2 times we see in Scripture that Jesus is amazed. One, it happens in his hometown, and they were so filled with disbelief, it literally shut down God's power to do anything because they rejected it before it could even be offered. And Jesus was amazed at their unbelief. And then we see this man, and it says that Jesus was amazed at his faith. He even said, I have not seen such a faith in all Israel. Now, that line is basically saying all people who consider themselves to be a part of the nation of God. If you are Jewish, Hebrew, Israelite, whatever name you think you want to go by, I've never seen faith like this in all of you. Kind of bummed that steph isn't here tonight because I was thinking about this from the movie 10 Things I Hate About You. Now one of my favorite quotes from the movie, the girl says, I know you can be overwhelmed and I know you can be underwhelmed, but can you just be whelmed?
I think you can in Europe.
And there's the rest of the quote. And so I was kind of thinking about this, like Jesus was amazed at great faith, and he was amazed at great unbelief. And so, I know you can be amazed, but can you just be mazed? Okay, hold on, this is good. Let that sink in for a minute. I know you can be amazed, but can you just be mazed? See, here's the thing. When we walk through our daily walk, when we walk through our lives with Jesus, we are either going to blow his mind, and he's going to be amazed by our faith, or he's just going to be mazed. We're going to give him a confused heart that just doesn't understand why his children don't understand. See, has anybody ever been to like a corn maze? Have you ever been in a maze and totally gotten lost? Okay, if you've never been in one, has your pencil ever tried to be in a maze and your pencil got lost? And you're just confused. You have no idea where to go. It's this utter state of confusion. And so if God isn't being amazed by us, then we're leaving God in an utter state of confusion by us. I think it's amazing that he would say this line after he was speaking to the multitudes. Now, we don't know how many people were listening to the Sermon on the Mount, but we can infer that there was a great number of people there. There were a lot of Jewish people. There were a lot of probably Jewish leaders there. There were a lot of people that Jesus had the opportunity to be amazed by. And, well, Jesus even had 12 disciples that were with him at all times. And not even in them did he give this level of compliment. That he was amazed at the faith of this Gentile man. Is Jesus amazed at your faith? Verse 10. When those who had been sent returned to the house, they found the servant in good health. This is one of those passages that makes me angry. I don't know if you guys would agree with this, but this is frustrating to me. I want the whole story. And they went back and he was alive. And he was well. But how? Like, have you ever... Does anybody else just think about this sometimes? Like, I want all the details of the story. Right? No? You're happy with it? I feel like the way that I read these Bible passages is the way that Michelle expects movies to end, right? She wants all the details. I want more information. But it just says, and they went back, and dude was good. You're like, oh. But here's something I notice. So here's my next question for you. Do you recognize the authority of God? Do you recognize the authority of God? This centurion knew what authority was. He was placed over 100 people. This centurion knew what authority was because when he spoke, it was the same as if Caesar had said it. If this man spoke and you heard it, you were to hear it as if it came from the emperor himself. This man knew what authority was. He even said, I say go and they go. I say come and they come. I say do this and they do that. See, as a centurion, if one of his tools, if one of his weapons had become broken, if it had become damaged in any way, the answer for him would be simple: to discard and replace. And a servant was nothing more than a tool to get things done. To a centurion, a servant should have been as easily discarded as a broken spear. Get me a new spear, get me a new servant. This one's dying. He actually had permission to take him out and kill him and then get a new servant. But we already see that this centurion was not like other centurions. This centurion didn't boss around his community. He built them a church. This centurion didn't just have people that he could command. It feels like he embraced people into his family. That he knew what it meant to love other people. And because of the authority that he had, and I would say in the authority that he chose not to hold over people, when he saw Jesus, he recognized what true authority was. When the stories had gone around of what Jesus had said, of the miracles he had done, you guys know this gossip got around. The news traveled quickly. This centurion would have heard and been the first to know of anything that happened in the region. Not only was Jesus amazed at his faith, you can see that this centurion was amazed at Jesus' authority. And so he went to the authority for a favor. Here's our last question tonight. Our last question is this: do you trust the power or the process? See, in this story, what we see is that the centurion sent the Jewish leaders to go and get Jesus. Okay, why would he do that? Because he was a Gentile. Because he was a Roman guard. Because he was the enemy. He knew that under rabbinic law, he was unworthy to be in the presence of Jesus. He was unworthy to be in the presence of God. It also makes me realize that this man who built this synagogue also realized that he was unworthy to even enter into it. How amazing of a love is that? To build a place of worship that you know you won't be invited into. And because he knew that he wouldn't even be invited into the church, how in the world was he worthy to come before the pastor? So he sent Jewish leaders. And then, as news traveled that Jesus was getting closer, he also knew this, that under rabbinic law, They were forbidden from entering into the home of a Gentile. They weren't worthy for a Jewish leader, a rabbi of great teaching, to enter into his home. So then he sent some other servants and said, hey, thanks for coming. I know you can't even come into my house. I've heard stories about how you've laid hands on people and how you've touched people and you've spoken into people. And I know that you can't do that right now because we're not worthy of that. So just speak that word of authority and it will be done. See, this was such great faith because this was not a way that Jesus had previously healed. This was new. Before, Jesus was always in the room. He was in the presence. And this man trusted that Jesus could just say it. And it would be done. Do you trust the power or the process? How often do you go to church, read your verse of the day, say your prayer at mealtime, and expect something good to happen? But Lord, I did the process. I woke up. I read my verse of the day. I even checked to make sure it was in the right context today. We prayed before meals. I even included before my coffee. Right? We do these processes. How often do we come into the presence of God, recognize His power, or how often do we just go through the process hoping that random blessings happen to us? See, these are questions that I don't like asking either. Because these are questions that force me to look in the mirror. These are questions where I go, dang God, how many days this week did I just go through the process? How many days, how many times did I actually enter into your presence expecting your power and authority to make a difference? Or how many times did I just hope that it did? We all go through the process. We all just we understand what it means to go through the motions. In our Old Testament overview class, one of the biggest things that we see coming out of the prophets is that the prophets are speaking against the nation of Israel. And their word is this: God doesn't want you to go through the motions anymore. You're doing the sacrifices. You're doing the thing, but you're not doing it with the right heart. In fact, to one people, the prophet says, God hates your worship because it wasn't for Him and Him alone. In Revelation, we see the church of Laodicea. This is that line where it says that if you're neither hot nor cold, you are lukewarm, worth spitting out of God's mouth. And so here's the thing about that. We've read this to assume that hot means on fire for God, and cold means you could care less about God, and lukewarm is somewhere in the middle. That's not true. Cold was good. Hot was good. In the middle was not. See, the church at Laodicea, here's the reason for it. It sat in this place that was at the bottom of the hill. If you had gone further up the hill, you had these hot springs that were known for the healing attribute, right? How many like just a hot bath Or how many have actually been able to sit in a mineral hot spring and the refreshment and the healing that it brings to your body? And lower down, you had cold. I flipped that. Higher up, you have the cold water. And the cold water is quenching and refreshing. And then further down, you have the hot springs. But right in the middle, the water was just lukewarm. It wasn't quenching. It wasn't refreshing. It wasn't healing. It was good for the plants, but that's it. How often does our worship fall into the lukewarm category? Paul tells us that we're supposed to pray without ceasing. I think, and I think I've said this before, that I think a better understanding in today's culture would be to translate that as to worship without ceasing. That we should always be in this constant state of worshiping. But how often does our worship just fall into methods? How often does our walk with God just fall into processes? And so I just want to encourage you to say that there is something amazing about recognizing the authority of God and living in the power of the authority. See, these last two questions build on each other. The first one, do you recognize the authority of God? Do you recognize that God is the author of creation? Do you recognize that God can do anything? That God has no limits. That God isn't even limited by time because God exists outside of time. And then as God is existing outside of time, He is also existing everywhere in time at the same time. We say that God is omnipresent, that God is omniscient, and God is all-knowing. That there is nothing that doesn't fall under God's authority. Do you recognize God's authority? And do you trust the power of the authority? Or do you put your trust in a process, hoping for results? So I'd love to just challenge you to say, live a life. Display faith that amazes God. Love your community in a way that amazes your community. Trust God that He can do anything at any time, any way that He wants, because He's God. Don't just go through the process hoping for random blessings. Instead, know who the God is that you're speaking to and trust Him to work miracles. God, thank you. Thank you for being amazing. Thank you for being awesome. Thank you for being something that we have spent all of existence trying to create words that express how amazing, awesome you are. The fact is, God, we can't even come up with words that can properly describe the awesomeness of who you are. That literally in the Old Testament, to speak your name was to just have our breath taken away. Lord, I pray that every day, that every moment, that we would live in a way where it just takes our breath away as we just declare who you are. Lord, would you help us to be people that love our neighbors, that love our community, that love our families. Lord, that we would have a faith that would be on display and people would be amazed by it. And then, God, I pray that we would just be people that would understand who you are, the authority that you have, and the power of what you can do and want to do in us, around us, and through us. And so, Lord, help us. Help us to just be yours. Help us to let go of all the things that make us us, and help us to be yours, that we would be tools that you would use. God, we love you. It's in your name we pray. Amen.